Lynette, we can go and get started.
Excellent, thank you. Well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad you could join us for today's CoSN webinar on the trusted learning environment with a specific focus on the business practices. As we go, if you have questions throughout, please enter them into the chat box and we will try to respond to your questions in line, as well as we should have some time for a bit of Q&A towards the end. For those of you not familiar with CoSN, CoSN is the premier professional association for school system technology leaders. Been supporting technology leaders for many years, and CoSN is really focused on providing you with the management, community building, and advocacy tools that you need to succeed. As you know, a variety of resources that CoSN puts out are free to everyone, and there are specific and dedicated benefits and additional materials and resources that are available to CoSN members. I'm delighted here today to be joined by Melissa Tevenkamp and James Watson to talk about these practices. Both Melissa and James have gone through the TLE program and are TLE Seal recipients, so we're very lucky to have them join us. By way of introduction, I'm Lynette Attai. I'm the Project Director for CoSN's Privacy Initiative and Trusted Learning Environment Program. I'm also the founder of Playwell, which is a privacy compliance consulting firm, work with organizations across the US and overseas on navigating their privacy responsibilities. I'd like to ask Melissa and James to introduce themselves, give you a little information about them. Melissa, let's start with you.
Great, thank you, Lynette. I'm Melissa Tevenkamp. I'm the Director of Instructional Technology for Raytown Quality Schools just right outside of Kansas City, Missouri. I've been in my position for just into 14 years now, and I am a CoSN board member and the co-chair of the Data Privacy Committee. I was part of the group that actually created the TLE seal to work towards that creation, and one of the first groups, or first cohort, to be able to earn that seal just a little over 3 years ago, I believe. Isn't that, Lynette?
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Melissa. And James, do you mind introducing yourself?
Good afternoon. My name is James Watson. I am a security administrator for the Leander Independent School District. We're in Central Texas. I've been a school district veteran for pretty much all my career. Started off as a teacher. I've been with districts large and small, from a couple of thousand students all the way up to Dallas ISD with 150,000. Mainly working in the engineering side and with a focus on identity and access management. This led me into security administration, and because of all the work we do interacting with student information systems, legal, leadership, and other groups, that was a natural fit for me to be able to take a role in our application for the trusted learning environment. I hold a CISSP certification in security and am active in Central Texas security-oriented groups.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. We're lucky to have you both here. I wanted to start just by level setting and introducing the TLE seal and make sure everyone understands the framework with which we're going to discuss the business practices and working with technology providers. So as Melissa mentioned, CoSN created the seal about 3 years ago. It's really designed to address what I'm sure you all feel, which is the inherent tension between technology programs that are building and continuing to grow in school systems and concerns about privacy that I'm sure many of you hear about on an ongoing basis, concerns from parents, from parent advocates. Certainly we have a robust climate of privacy legislation that has built up around student data privacy across the country. So we want to provide a framework that provided a way for school systems to demonstrate to the community the tangible steps they were taking to protect student data privacy, to help to reframe the conversation, provide some reassurance in the community about how school systems were actually taking seriously and acting around their data protection responsibilities, while providing more information for parents and other community members about what those steps actually were. So the privacy framework of the TLE was built. It was created by CoSN in partnership with 28 school system leaders, including Melissa, and also in partnership with our lead organizations, AASA, the Superintendent's Association, ASBO, the Association of School Business Officials, and ASCD. We have, over the years, earned the support of a number of other organizational partners, and we're delighted to have them all in our corner around this work. So the TLE program is designed into 25 specific requirements for data protection across 5 practice areas. And the practice areas are leadership, business, data security, professional development, and classroom practices. And of course, today we're going to focus on the business practices. It is an application program. The TLE is the only framework that exists for school systems around privacy, and it is a way to measure, improve, and attest to your privacy practices. And the way it works is simply to fill out an application, provide us with information at CoSN about how you are meeting the practice requirements, as well as providing examples of evidence of how you're meeting the practice requirements. Those applications are reviewed by myself and a technology leader who is probably one of your peers across the country. If the seal is awarded, it is valid for 2 years, after which we ask you to reapply. We want to see improvement. The TLE seal is not a measure of perfection. I think there is no such thing as perfect privacy or perfect security. If there were, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But it is a measure of meeting high standards and then committing to continuously improve. And so we look for that in the application renewals. We consider it to be, and it has been recognized as a mark of distinction for school systems across the country. This is very concrete, tangible evidence of how you are protecting student data privacy. So it's a very important commitment to your community members, to your legislators, about the good work that you are doing to protect student data privacy. All too often we hear about the fear and the concern about what school systems are doing to protect student data privacy. This is a specific framework that helps you move in the right direction around privacy. As I mentioned, it is broken down into 5 practices, and overall, these areas represent a holistic look at a school system. It is everything from your superintendent to how your teachers are talking to parents and how they are behaving in the classroom. It encompasses data security. It encompasses the training that you provide to your employees, what training you might make available to parents, as well as, of course, where we want to focus in on today, working with technology providers. I don't think I need to tell any of you why this has become so important. The pressure that has come to bear around technology use in school systems has been fairly intense. And the TLE SEAL program has really been positioned as a way to help start to alleviate those pressures and get down to the business of protecting student data privacy. The SEAL has been awarded to date to a number of school systems across the country, including, of course, Leander and Raytown, who are with us today. These school systems represent small, medium, large public school systems across the country, private schools. They are small, they are rural, they are urban. Some of them are very well resourced, some of them are very poorly resourced. I am hopeful that within this list, you can find a school system that somehow looks like yours or operates in a similar fashion to yours, and take some comfort in knowing that if they did it, you can do it too. I'd like to now pause and maybe turn this over to James. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about Leander. and why you decided to apply for the TLE.
Yes, Lynette. Leander ISD is a Central Texas school district. We're in the Austin area. We historically were a rural district, but then the city of Austin explosively grew on top of us, along with its neighbor Cedar Park. So we've been under a period of dramatic growth for practically 2 decades now. We currently have about 45,000 students. We're anticipating having up to 75,000 within the next 10 years. And at this point, sometimes it feels like we're more of a construction company than a school district, but we still have to do all of the other aspects of education as well. Dell, for example, resides in one of our neighbor school districts, Round Rock, who's also a TLE recipient. And we, in addition to Dell and Apple and the other businesses in the area, we have a very technologically savvy constituency, savvy community, parents, board. And so we knew that we would have to be prepared to demonstrate a modern and progressive approach to protecting security and privacy. So that's why we were interested in TLE. Initially, we began looking at a variety of other frameworks, whether it be from NIST, COBIT, ISO organizations, and these were all very good and all very comprehensive, yet they were so vast and so broad that it was always challenging for us to figure out a way to match it to our organizational needs. So when we learned about TLE and its direct correlation to our organization, that was an immediate win for us. It gave us the ability to present to our leadership, to our community in terms that were universally understood within the organization as far as the value, and it was accepted and we proceeded at once.
Wonderful, thank you. Melissa, what about you? Tell us a little bit about Raytown and why you decided to apply for this deal.
Sure. Raytown is a tier 1 suburb of Kansas City, Missouri, so we're just on the outside of Kansas City. We are a unique district of 9,000 students where our district isn't just Raytown proper, like the city of Raytown, but we actually have 3 cities that feed into our school district, Kansas City being one of them. Kansas City has its own school district, but we've been consolidated in Missouri. So we have part of Kansas City and part of another neighboring district, Independence, with students that feed into us. And we have a unique situation where 8 of our schools, 8 of our 20 school buildings actually reside in the city limits of Kansas City. So when we do building projects and when we do any type of community partnerships, we have some very interesting challenges and opportunities available to us just because of the geographic dynamic of what we have. We are a minority majority district and very, very diverse district, which we take a lot of pride in. And that provides amazing experiences and opportunities for our students, and then also some challenges when we roll out any type of initiative just because of the number of languages spoken in our district and geographically the division within our population. As I had mentioned before, I was part of the initial working group that helped to develop the Trusted Learning Environment Seal, and data privacy has just always been a passion of mine. And security as well. So when I started with the district 14 years ago, I started on a mission of becoming a data secure and then data privacy district and really making sure that we have all of those processes in place. Working on the Trusted Learning Environment Seal opened up more ideas and opportunities of how we can continue to grow our data governance program. And the opportunity to apply and be part of that first cohort, the benefit for us, because we were 10 years into our journey by that point in time, was to solidify the work that we were doing and to really to show that we were on the right track. We've been on the leading cutting edge of this, and sometimes that feels harsh to teachers. They don't know why we're making the changes that our neighboring school districts aren't making. They don't know why we have certain rules in place and limitations, or they feel limitations that other districts don't have. And so working through the seal, one, gave us the opportunity to really solidify and document all of our processes and procedures and why we do what we do. But to get that recognition to help, I don't want to necessarily justify, but really kind of justify the why we're doing the work and how important it is, and add that extra layer of validity. I joke around a lot that oftentimes your street cred isn't nearly as valuable on your street as it is on the neighboring street. And so I would talk a lot about some of the things that we were doing on a national level. And that ability to move forward internally and have that credibility really does help to have the seal come along with it and say, we really are going in the right direction. We're going where we need to go. And it really helps solidify making data privacy a priority for our district.
That's great. Thank you, Melissa. And before we dive into the business practices, which I know is what everyone really wants to hear, I just wanted to share a little bit about what you get when you apply for the seal, because I think it's important for people to know that regardless of whether or not you earn the seal, we do actually review your applications and we'll send you back your scores as well as guidance on how you might improve on each of the practice areas and benchmarking reports that show you how your scores compare to the aggregate scores of a TLE seal recipient. So there is benefit to just going through the process. And we do have TLE seal recipients who applied and didn't get it the first time around, but took the feedback, took the benchmarking report, then went back, improved, and came back and have subsequently earned the seal. Now, I know that for many districts, the thought of going through this process can be a little bit daunting. There are a lot of moving parts. And I wonder if each of you could take a minute and tell us, maybe James, we'll start with you. How did you, sort of approach this in your district? What was the process like, and how did it help going through this process?
Yes, it absolutely helped. In our case, we were very fortunate that we had some strong leadership that kicked off the process. Our counterpart to Melissa was very vocal in reaching out to the other members of leadership to market the importance of the process. Because, of course, as you know, with all of the different moving parts between classroom, business, leadership, et cetera, you're requiring a lot of people's time who up until that point have typically gone under the good faith assumption that in many cases IT is just handling it, as it were. And so what we were really accomplishing and hoping to accomplish, and we did, was achieving kind of a formalization. Both of you have touched upon this, the idea of measuring, documenting, formalizing processes that in many cases are already in place, but in a looser, kind of less structured format. And so this process of kind of tightening up and documenting and coordinating and formalizing both the processes and the relationships around those processes was really valuable to us as a part of pursuing the seal.
Melissa, what about you?
This was a long road for us. Again, we started 10 years ago on really working towards the data governance program we have now. And I always say go slow to go fast, and we really did take a slow approach. So when I started years and years ago, we didn't have centralization of technology adoption, and we started with the major curriculum adoption. It's kind of the low-hanging fruit. It's the items that we were able to know about most of the time because we were being asked to help with that data sharing. And we really started just tackling that first and getting the central office instructional team on board. We had a lot of conversations at cabinet level about the processes that we needed to have in place, the reasons why. And I made sure philosophically everybody at the cabinet level was on board with the direction we were going. You always run the risk when you have an adoption or a process in place for any type of vetting and any type of adoption process, that if somebody doesn't like your process and then they can go above you and bypass you, then you lose a lot of, one, credibility, but the ability then to continue to maintain that. And so I wanted to make sure that the ability to go above me and just say, hey, Melissa's telling us we can't use a tool, or we're having to delay the integration by 2 months because the contract's taking too long, we just need to sign the contract, that they weren't going to be able to bypass me, that the cabinet level really did support the direction we were going. They believed in it. and we were all headed in that same direction. And I think that that has been the biggest win and has allowed us over the last 3 years to implement all of the processes and solidify them. Because again, if you don't have that support all the way up and you can be bypassed, then your process doesn't really hold nearly as much weight as you need it to. I will say that as we were going through our TLE application, one of the worst and best things that could happen for the school districts in the state of Missouri with data privacy was that the Attorney General's office decided to do audits of data governance programs and data security of school districts. And the release of the audit findings were happening just around the time we were discussing what it would take to go through and get the TLE and the processes that we need to solidify and the documentation we need to have in place. And our state auditor requires now school districts to be audit compliant to have a record of all data being shared with any vendor. And that alone forced the need within all school districts in the state of Missouri for us to have some type of vetting process, because in order for us to have any type of documentation of what systems we're sharing data with, we have to know about those systems. So that really helped kind of solidify as we were going through. And that was really within 6 months of that application process starting that those findings started coming out. So that was very helpful for us. But more importantly, just having those upper level discussions to make sure everybody was on board.
That's great. That makes sense. You know, when we start to now focus in on the TLE business practices, there are 4 business requirements for the TLE program, and you see 2 of them here, and we'll share the other 2 in a minute. And Melissa, you've touched on I think something that is important to and a pressing challenge for many of your peers, which is how do I get a program in place to vet the technology? How do I wrap my arms around all the technology that might be in the system? And I think that, you know, Melissa, you had in some ways a benefit of the state coming in and saying, hey, listen, you need to have this under control. You need some reporting around it. James, tell us a little bit about your approach to building a vetting process for technologies.
We had a forerunner of the process, and it was primarily around the instructional side. Most of the technology that's coming in comes in through the instructional side. As teachers are encouraged to innovate and try new things, they naturally gravitate towards these new types of tools. So we built upon it, we formalized it with campus administration, but we quickly identified kind of the same concern regarding that Melissa brought up, that there were on the business side, there could be things brought in that bypass the process and so forth. And so one of the areas that we were most concerned with was demonstrating the enforceable aspect of the business practices that are required for TLE certification. So we continue to be in the process of trying to formalize those through official documented business operation guidelines, in addition to practices and procedures that occur at the instructional level. And so that's going to be kind of a next phase for us, where it does become, in a way, formally impossible to bypass the actual process. Whereas now it does rely to some degree, when you're initially bringing it in, on buy-in and on demonstrating that it will not be disruptive or will not introduce too much friction in the processes. And so once you are able to demonstrate that, then I think we're going to be able to achieve our next step of, formalizing it through official written business operation guidelines related to the purchasing processes themselves and the requirements that happen there.
That's great. And we've got a great question. I think I'll approach this with Melissa. What stats or data did you use to have that conversation at the cabinet level? How did you balance, starting that conversation, getting people on board? Was it a sort of the sky is falling, we have to do something, or is a little bit of, carrot and stick? How did you approach that?
Well, I will tell you that I started initially just saying, hey, FERPA requires us to do this. We need to make sure we're compliant. And I tried that approach. And years ago, I would get the pushback of, really, what's the harm? You know, so what? What's going to happen to us if we don't follow this process? And so I learned very quickly that, one, the sky is falling technique only works with certain individuals, but two, each member of cabinet has a different motivator, I guess is the best way to see it. My CFO, he cares about the bottom line, he cares about efficiencies, and he cares about risk and impact. And so I really collected the data to show, one, what is the risk, what kind of insurance coverage, what does our insurance cover, what does it not cover. We found out that our carrier would not cover a data breach of a third party if our contract didn't have specific language in it. And so my CFO, when you're talking about risk mitigation, those are really big items to bring to have that discussion with him. My special ed department, when we're talking about compliance and data sharing, and they are very much aware of what data is being shared with whom. And so when you talk about how maybe IEP information may be being shared that shouldn't be with other individuals, and so really just having those personal conversations with each member of cabinet. We also had discussions about public perception and what that looks like around data breaches, and the next time we go out for a bond issue, and what are we going to have in place to, what does that look like on the PR side? Our PR person sits on cabinet. And so we just had those discussions and making sure that I brought something to the table that really speaks to what each person there really focuses on, because I don't expect them to know the technology side of it. And instead of that sky is falling approach, so that's my job. Let me know, or let me be the one that's the expert that helps protect us in this. I just need you to support me in that process. How do we do this as a team? I was able to get cabinet, and I do sit on cabinet, which I think is very beneficial in this process, but having somebody on cabinet that sits and makes that case, our entire cabinet is signed off as the data governance team. So those who oversee the data governance program for the district is every single member of cabinet, and it is just not myself. And each cabinet member is responsible, and they are they are the ones who are responsible for the data integrity over their areas and ensuring that their staff are maintaining and adhering to policies and procedures. And so that is very helpful because it's a team approach and not just a technology approach. So I don't have to use the sky is falling anymore. This is just a priority and a mission for us. But that took time, and it wasn't one discussion. It was a series of discussions. I went slow. I introduced it slowly to them. I started talking about national trends. I will tell you right now, there are so many data breaches out there that you can use any one of them to start that conversation, and then just continue that conversation and start talking about it. I always say it's not a matter of if our data breach is going to happen. It's a matter of when the company finds out that they've been breached, and what's our response going to be, and how are we going to be protected, and how is that going to impact what we do on a daily basis. And so those are great discussions to have just to bring everybody on board. I don't like the sky is falling approach. Sometimes we do have to speak truth, which can be scary, but really just talking about what their motivators are have helped a lot.
That's great. And I think for those of you who are struggling with this question, CoSN has just put out in the last day a guide to the leadership practice of the TLE, which is really meant for your superintendent, cabinet level team to do a deep dive into what is required from a leadership perspective in order to help you build a data protection program across your organization. And we are coming out with a companion piece that is a presentation deck that you can customize to make the case to your leadership about privacy. So that is coming soon. James, I want to turn again to you and talk a little bit about working with technology providers. Obviously, as you're vetting these tools, as you're vetting the technologies, sometimes you have to have a conversation with the technology provider. Sometimes what's happening isn't obvious. There may be contract language that you want to have in place, data protection language that you want to have in place to make sure that your data protection requirements are met. How do you approach that? I see a lot of fear in the ecosystem around navigating that conversation with technology providers. What's your experience been like?
We've had a lot of experience with that over the course of the last year. But first, I wanted to add one more when, not if, part of the conversation that you can have with leadership related to what Melissa was touching on here in the state of Texas. Just last summer, our state legislature added local school districts to the cybersecurity requirements that are imposed upon state agencies already. There's federal legislation discussion. The type of motivation that helped Melissa get hers off the ground is pretty much almost assuredly coming to all of the members of our audience today. And so this type of process will really help you get ahead of that and have answers to the questions of what are we doing and how are we going to do it. Now, regarding the relationships or the negotiations with vendors, that's been quite the process because it's constantly moving. Just in the last year or two that we've been working on this, it's changed multiple times. It's gone from a case of here's our terms of service, take it or leave it, to okay, enough people are demanding data protection language that we will talk to you. And now it's slowly morphing into, we're sick of talking to you, so here's our data protection language, take it or leave it. And so this is going to keep moving, and it's going to be very important as part of the business processes that you build a procedure that is flexible and is not assuming that you're going to select some language, you're going to be done, and then it's just you give it to people and they have to take it or not. We've been very fortunate to have a great relationship with our legal team. We've had a lot of conversations up to the point that essentially they trusted us to make the inevitable occasional modifications and addendums to data sharing language that are necessary in order to do business with many of your partners. You're just going to have to accept that there are going to be unique business requirements. There's going to be organizations that both contract with you and with your parents and students directly outside of the auspices of the district. There will be partnerships, which vary slightly from things like vendor relationships, such as when you coordinate with local schools and universities for dual enrollment, dual credit types of programs with huge amounts of data sharing. So the way we attempted to do it is to designate a person who oversaw a process and had some well-defined responsibilities of how to interact with the vendors, provide them with the requested language, and then begin any process, if necessary, of arranging addendums or modifications to contract language, which we then in ITS were somewhat deputized to handle as long as they remained within reason. And we had to make some judgment calls on that. But that's been working more or less effectively for us. It will continue to be a bit of a workload. There's just really no getting around that. And you're having to be in ITS as somewhat of a part-time paralegal in a sense, and add a little bit of that to your skill set here related to data privacy and security.
That's right. And as I always say, there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all company. There's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all school system. So a little flexibility goes a long way. And I think also very important as a school system, know what your requirements are before going into a negotiation, not just what's on your paper, but what your requirements are for different categories of data with different sensitivities and different systems so that you can have some of that flexibility and make for more productive conversations when you do have them. Melissa, you do quite a bit of negotiating with technology providers. Any tips you can share?
I would say I want to echo what you just said. Have some flexibility and take the time to know, one, what you need and why you need it, and don't be afraid to have that conversation. I vet every single contract that goes through the district that has any type of data sharing. So it's not just around student data, but staff data as well. Any type of data sharing goes through my desk, and I have been given the liberties to make those contract modifications as needed, and I have access to legal counsel when I need to. I do feel like some days I play an attorney just because we do so much with contracts now and really understanding it. But I will tell you, I approach every contract differently depending on the data that we share. One company that's only maybe taking, the latest one that I'm sorry, I've got a little bit of cold today. The latest that I'm negotiating right now is a drug testing company that does random student drug testing. They have a randomized student number or a randomized number, and there keep test results associated with that number. I treat that contract differently than I'm treating my SPED IEP system. Now, there's still a lot of data governance requirements in there, but not at that level that I am going to with my student information system or my IEP system or even my transportation system. There's just different levels of data that are stored in these systems, and we need to be reasonable with our expectations as we make contract negotiations. And I think sometimes when we get the very big pushbacks, a lot of that's because we're maybe being a little unreasonable or don't understand, or sometimes that the vendor we're talking to doesn't understand. I do get a lot of companies now. It used to be, hey, nobody's ever asked me that. They're a lot more willing to take on those conversations, except for I do have some, mainly some of your smaller startups that don't realize that they're actually housing student information. We have a great question on the chat that talks about what if we're just rostering and we're only using first name, last name, and then maybe they're looking at it's just a, it is just a roster. It's just my seating chart. Or maybe it's just a math program and all they're doing is math fluency and I'm not really using that to grade. And we have some of these companies who don't realize that they are actually creating student records, that they're housing information that we haven't said is just directory information. They have additional information on our students. And we do still have to have a contract in place with them, but the level of protections may be a little bit different. Some of our expectations are a little different than maybe somebody who has our IEPs. And so just knowing that and knowing what your expectations are, making sure that they're reasonable, but also having those conversations and not being afraid to have that with the companies. We're both humans on both sides. So we need to have those adult conversations and work through those challenges.
It's great information and a great question that we got in the chat, and it leads very nicely into our next two TLE practices. And the question is essentially, as Melissa noted, what if the data is just a name, right? Where does the concern begin? Why can't my teachers agree to terms of use and a privacy policy and use this product in the classroom? Or what if there's really no apparent information being provided? And what I like to remind school districts is that just because there's not a name doesn't mean that personal information isn't going to be collected, because personal information can be indirect identifiers, combinations of passively collected data, and it doesn't mean that education isn't going to be created as a result of the student using the product. And we know that when we are clicking to agree to terms and privacy policies, particularly for teachers in classroom technologies, that is signing a contract. And when you sign a contract, you are not only making a decision about the appropriateness of that agreement for your organization, but also you're making some privacy decisions for your students. And we've also, gotten some news in the chat, some updates in the chat, and very timely. And I think, James, to your point, the laws are changing, and we see this in New York, we see this in Connecticut, we see this in Illinois, where they're starting to look at student data and moving away, in a sense, from the risk model and to a place where all data is equally protected, or at least there are similar requirements for breach notification, regardless of whether or not it's data you already would have shared in your yearbook or data that is, financial or otherwise extra sensitive. So this question of how do we, we get a vetting process in place, we start working with technology providers, but how do we get our teachers on board with the vetting process? How do we communicate to them the value of that and put it together in a way that's measurable and enforceable across the organization? James, how has this been working out for you and Leander? What are some of the approaches you've taken around that?
Well, we started off with some of the traditional types of approaches. We do annual compliance training on data security and student data privacy. We do have a training plan related to our business practices and the digital resource approval process that we kind of reinforce through methods like email and scheduled reminders and so forth. But those somehow are not fully satisfying in terms of feeling like you're really integrating it into the culture and the business. One of the things that we're trying to do now that I think maybe is a little more promising is that we're trying to piggyback on some of the instructional initiatives. There's a big push right now to align some of our culture around this concept of the 5 C's, critical thinking, collaboration, so forth, one of them being citizenship. And so we're trying to blend in some of these ideas about how important it is to instruct students on these areas of digital identity protection and safe habits online and so forth. And we hope, because they're doing this through instructional, they have tools that they're using to measure it and see about the effectiveness, and we'll have some feelings that this has momentum that will remain with us. And we're really hoping that that kind of continuous background on those subjects and the importance of sharing it and teaching it to the students will kind of follow through and reinforcing our staff as well in the concept, and be a reminder that when they hear about our processes for digital resources, that they'll understand that it's related to this other thing that we are emphasizing so strongly with our students, and pull it all together.
That's great. A lot of work to get the organization all rowing in the same direction, but very important work. Melissa, you've done a lot of work to try to keep your training fresh. Tell us a little bit about your approach.
Absolutely. Well, I will say that we started before, so we've had an adoption process in place for a very long time. And then we moved to really a focus on district curriculum adoption. And one thing that we do have going for us is that our district has a standardized curriculum, and we have almost like a menu for every content area for each tier, tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 intervention for instruction. And we have standardized tools that we would like for them to use. Some are purchased, some are free. And that menu is what our teachers should be staying in, and that's from the curriculum side. So we align very nicely with the curriculum side of having to have an adoption process then that goes through the curriculum coordinator over that content area, or the building leadership that is responsible for the curriculum, to make sure that it aligns with what our district curriculum is. And so that's been great. We do our annual policy review. We use humor because I think we have a good sense of humor within my department, but we feel like that is the best approach for us, because if it's funny and if it's short, they tend to watch it and remember it. And so our beginning of the year policy video is, I think, 6 or 7 minutes. It is a spoof of a newscast, and we go through policies, but we use humor, and we talk about, all of the basic technology safety measures. But we do it through, through these little short snippets in a fake newscast. We also, throughout the year, we create videos and memes that we email out. Our latest one, actually our latest 2 that I love, one is Shark Tank, and we have vendors coming and presenting to the instructional team. So it's not just me, it is our cabinet instructional, or the instructional team on our cabinet, and myself sitting as the sharks, and they're presenting their products to us, and we're talking about their terms of service and why we do and don't agree with them, and what restrictions we might have if we implement that, or maybe we just deny that. And so we're very upfront with what we're doing internally, showing a common face amongst all cabinet. We're all on board, and it's really funny. And so we did 3 different episodes of Shark Tank that we reeled out, reviewing 3 different apps, one that we denied, one we approved with restrictions, and one that we just allowed in the district, just so they could see those different scenarios for us. Our latest one is Pawn Stars, where we have instructional, hackers coming in and talking about how they've just hacked or they've used spoofing, and they've stolen all of this data of kids, and talking about how much it's worth and why we might, why that might be out on the dark web. And so we use a lot of humor throughout the year. At least every few months we have a video coming out, and then in between that we have memes that we're sending out over email talking about data privacy and security in our process. In addition to that, we do have a face-to-face annual training that either our administrators or myself, I will go out and do with the buildings if the administrator's not comfortable doing that. Talking about why we do what we do, about the Trusted Learning Environment seal, what we feel is a priority, and why we feel that the digital safety of our students is just as important as the physical safety. And we really relate the digital safety and physical safety and just the overall safety of our students. And so we're really just trying to take that holistic approach, use humor and very, very short segments as much as absolutely possible as we go throughout the year.
That's terrific. I look forward to seeing some of those videos, as I'm sure others will as well. It's I often remind school systems that your training program may be well resourced. Perhaps you have an LMS, perhaps you have the luxury of creating or purchasing some sophisticated training, but don't let that stand in the way if you don't have that luxury, or if you want to keep it fresh. Little humor, short videos, you know, we all have phones these days, pretty simple to spin up some short videos, not as sophisticated as what Melissa's talking about, but there are ways to put your training in front of your teams that are short, fresh, attention-getting, that will keep this at least top of mind, top of conversation. To Melissa's point, if you give them something to laugh about, you give them something to talk about, and what's better than having your teachers talking about privacy and security. I want to shift gears a little bit. I often say that there's no such thing as a positive story about data privacy, except, of course, when it comes to the TLE. All of our TLE seal recipients have been the beneficiaries of really tremendously positive national press, local press, and both of you as well. James, tell us a little bit about how earning the TLE seal, you know, has it changed things in the community for you? What's been the impact?
It does generate some very complimentary attention, for certain. We observed that we were the subject of multiple news stories that weren't necessarily initiated or even anticipated by our school and community relations group, and others reached out to us to provide content for stories that they wanted to produce, which we then were featured in a complimentary way. So that's been very nice for us. In addition, one of the other unanticipated benefits was that going through the process helped us really improve our infrastructure for even responding and communicating about things that we didn't know we would do later. We built out and improved our website and other communications related to providing the transparency that TLE requests. And so when we had subsequent needs to communicate information, we had mechanisms already in place to quickly publish it, to quickly communicate. We'd already established the relationships to get information out. And so that process became very smooth for us. And those were all benefits to us that we all observed very quickly afterwards.
That's great. So nice to be bridging that communications gap with the community and finding easier pathways to share information, part of which is what is required under the TLE. And so it forces you to look inwards and also look outwards and think about how are you communicating this important privacy work with parents? How are you letting them know the care with which you are treating not just their children, but their children's data? Melissa, what about you? What's been the impact that you've seen in the community?
It's been slower, I believe, as far as to really see that impact in the community. We talk about it. I really see that the publicity really helped with some of even our board member buy-in, and that level starts to spread. But now what we're seeing more than anything is that when our PTA, we don't have a really highly active PTA in our district, and when the Parents Teachers Association wants some content, and they're actually thinking about content now on data privacy, and they're reaching out to me to come in and present on data privacy, just even for the parents and for the students and keeping their kids safe. And I see that our community is now leaning towards us for expertise and really some guidance. And that has been great to see that develop over the last couple of years, because it was non-existent. We would try to hold a parent meeting on data privacy and really have nobody show up, literally nobody show up to a parent meeting. And so now being invited to come to a PTA event with a couple hundred parents and be able to talk and really be seen as a source of knowledge and expertise in the area, and that trust, I think part of it too is some of the things we don't see. We don't see a lot of those attacks, and we see more of the support for what we're doing. And so you just see that whole conversation shifting to be more positive. When we have data breaches coming out, we don't have the questioning so much about our district and what is our district doing. They know what we're doing. And I think that whole conversation has just changed over the last 3 years because of this.
That's terrific. And Melissa, we have a question I'm going to ask both of you, but since you're on, how is your team structured? We often say to school districts, you should have a CISO and you should have a CPO, and we know that's not really possible. So how is it structured in your group, and does the privacy and security work fall to IT? Where does that fit?
So privacy and security work falls to IT. I am the information security officer. So that is one thing that came out very positive within the TLE application in the state auditor, was that every district has to have a named ISO, and that came to me, and I welcomed that. One, because I felt comfortable with it, but two, we needed a centralized person for everybody to come through. I delegate out responsibilities with my team, so I do have a systems admin that is responsible more for the physical security side. And so underneath myself, and I'm structured really differently, I think, than a lot of other technology departments. We're a little bit bigger than departments within a normal size school district or a comparable size school district, but we handle a lot of tasks, I would say, and we do a lot of in-house development that maybe some other school districts don't do our size. But I have two assistant directors, one under information systems and one over operations. And then kind of combined with us, we have 3 system admins, one over databases, which does our data security, one over server management that does make sure our physical security of our servers are there, and then one over network security. And so the team of 6 of us really work to make sure that the data privacy side is really upheld and we review our policies annually. And then I take that to cabinet, and all of our findings, our data audits happen within my department, within the system admin. So all of my data access audits happen between my server person, my network person, and my database person. We vet our data inventories annually through my database person. And so we really work to gain all of that data, and then I present that annually to cabinet, and we talk about what processes we have in place. And so we're structured a little bit differently, but I have a team of those that really help with the implementation and any type of incident response. And then I have 2 others that help with tool vetting. They do a superficial vetting before it comes to me. So really they weed out the absolute no's. So I'm only working then with the ones that, that might be a true possibility for us.
Thank you. James, what about you? How is privacy and security kind of structured in your school system?
Well, we do have a Chief Technology Officer as the head of IT. Looking at the question, it's a pertinent one to us. It was a question about whether the difference between the student data privacy work and governance. And so the work will mostly be owned by IT, but we are trying to transfer the governance to our own version of a data governance committee. To the extent that we also attempt to include all of cabinet in a formal data governance committee to really explicitly define that policy and governance aspect there in order to give IT their marching orders of the top priorities, the big rocks, the large expectations. I think we're almost at the size where we are considering adding a CISO position officially. Our neighbor, Round Rock, just recently did that. But until then, I think it's a case of where that is simply a hat that someone most likely in IT will get to wear and should be added in addition to the other considerations within the department. We are split into the standard division of technical operations and student information. And so then we're also trying to coordinate more with the business units as well to blend in all of those aspects of data privacy too. But that's pretty much how our organizational structure works. And our biggest goal is just to be more explicit on that governance aspect and get our cabinet driving that.
Great, thank you for that. And we have a few minutes left. I wanted to make sure everyone had an opportunity to see some of the resources that are available to you to help you get started with your TLE journey. All of these on trustedlearning.org. Also know that we have a variety of districts that have come together in cohorts across the states you see listed here to work on their TLE applications together. So if you see one of your states listed here, I encourage you to reach out to us. Let us put you in touch with your cohort. If you would like to start a cohort in your state and you have a few districts together that would like to start working on it, also reach out to us and we can help you get organized and get started. There are, of course, a variety of free resources available to districts to help with your privacy journey, starting with the Protecting Privacy and Connected Learning Toolkit, which offers you fundamental, actionable guidance around navigating the privacy laws, the privacy requirements. We have an infographic that is downloadable and customizable. It's available in English and Spanish to help you communicate your commitment to data privacy to your community. There are a variety of other guides there, including on trustedlearning.org, a self-assessment around the TLE program. It's very easy. I've seen technology leaders take about 15 minutes to go through the TLE self-assessment and really get a sense of where are you at in your TLE journey. So I encourage you to check these out and download to start or improve on your pathway. And of course, I hope you will reach out with other questions. And of course, I hope you will join us at the CoSN conference in 2020. It's going to be a good one. It's going to be a big one, an important one, and we will certainly be there talking about privacy. I want to say a special thank you to Melissa and James for your help here, your insights, and the valuable information that you've been able to provide folks. And of course, thanks again also to the CoSN partners and lead partners, AASA, the Superintendent's Association, ASBO, and ASCD, as well as all of our supporters. If you have questions, if you have additional questions, if you'd like to reach out for more information, please don't hesitate. Reach out to your CoSN contact, put you in touch with me. And we would love to help you get started and answer additional questions that you might have. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining. I hope this has been helpful to you, and we look forward to seeing you at the next CoSN event.